Question for you. When does a Nuzlocke end? I'm doing a series where I complete a hardcore Nuzlocke of every game in the series, and since I'm coming up on Generation 2, I had to answer this question myself. The conclusion I came to is, it depends. I don't really like that answer. Let me explain. The first ending point for a Nuzlocke, and the simplest one, is when you become Pokemon League Champion. This is simple, easy to understand, and most importantly, it's the classic gameplay loop we're all familiar with. You grab all the badges, beat the champion, bam, you're done. Most people generally choose this as their stopping point for their Nuzlockes, and that's what I've always done too. However, the Johto games are known for their postgame, where after beating the Elite Four, you can go back to Kanto, earn 8 more badges, and fight Red on Mount Silver. This postgame is so iconic and integral to Johto's identity that people are split on if you end the run after the Elite Four, skipping the Kanto content entirely, or after completing all 16 gyms and battling Red. This brings me to my main issue when deciding when a Nuzlocke ends: post-game content. Personally, I've always been a completionist when I play a video game, so post-game content was meaningless to me. There was still meat on those bones, you know, that's just content. But not all post-games are created equal in Pokemon. During my Pokemon Blue Hardcore Nuzlocke, I decided to also fight Mewtwo and Cerulean Cave after defeating the Elite Four. This took me like 5 minutes and was really easy because Generation 1 freeze is a really dumb mechanic. This is the type of post-game that I don't think is interesting to include in a Nuzlocke. I didn't feel particularly tested and it didn't really add anything to the run overall. However, I would put the previously mentioned Johto postgame into the good category. Not that the content itself is good, mind you, like that level curve is just goofy as all hell. But I do think the Kanto stuff is very interesting narratively, showing how totally screwed the region has become. And it's relatively lengthy, and the Red battle on Mount Silver is just iconic. The Sevi Islands in Fire Red and Leaf Green are another example of this. The decent chunk of little content with some storyline, and once it's completed, the Elite Four levels up and gets a brand new team for you to fight. I haven't really seen anyone actually do this content in the Fire Red Leaf Green Nuzlockes, but that does feel like a solid chunk of content to do. And something about leaving the hardest trainer battles on the table by not rematching them kind of feels like you're just leaving the challenge on the table in a challenge run. This issue was also present in Heart Gold Soul Silver, which includes the stronger Elite Four rematch after obtaining 16 badges. I've even seen people say this rematch is the stopping point, not Red. But like, if you do decide Red is your stopping point, do you also have to do this rematch? We're at like 4 different possible endings for a Heart Gold Soul Silver Nuzlocke at this point. Maybe the solution is to introduce a new rule requiring you to battle all of the trainers. This has the obvious issue of like, maybe you just genuinely accidentally skip some guy in some back room of a cave or something, you technically broke the rules. But it does cover forcing you to battle all the major optional fights like the Elite Four rematches, Red and Johto, Steven and Emerald. However, this still doesn't cover the fact that some post-game content is just not interesting. Like, is Black City and Pokemon Black really adding anything to my run? I say no, but I would say rematching the Elite Four to actually fight Alder in Black and White 1 does. That said though, even those like extra challenge fights aren't all equal. The fight against Cynthia in Black and White 2 just doesn't really add anything to my run in my mind, despite being the challenge fight for those games. I guess it comes down to the narrative relevance. Fighting Steven at the end of Emerald makes sense because he's a former champion and a major player in the region's storyline, while Cynthia is just kind of there in Unova. This whole post-game problem becomes even crazier when you start to talk about the DLCs for later games. I've seen plenty of Generation 9 Nuzlockes where people will go over to the Teal Mask content to obtain Pokemon, but not actually do the storyline there. It feels kind of weird to me, but at the same time, like actually Nuzlocking the main game, Teal Mask, and Indigo Disc sounds like torture, despite those being narratively relevant and pretty interesting content-wise. Especially Indigo Disc. Maybe I'm wrong though, and it's actually pretty fun, who knows. I think maybe the best catch-all rule would be having to complete all the non-repeatable content. This would cover doing Kanto in Gen 2, Sevi Islands in Gen 3, the DLCs in Generation 9, and so on. It would also free you from goofy unnuzlockable things like the Battle Frontiers. I don't know, I don't have all the answers. Going forward, for my hardcore Nuzlocking every game in the series thing, I'm going to vary up my stopping points within a generation just to see what feels most satisfying and worthwhile. For example, in say my Pokemon Gold run, I'll end that after defeating the Elite Four like one school of thought says you should do. But in my Pokemon Crystal run, I'll go all the way to Red. I really do think conventional Nuzlockes do leave some meat on the bones by just stopping at the Elite Four, but we're gonna have to dig through those bones and find out what quality meat is left and what's just gristle. Thank you guys for listening to me ramble about Nuzlockes. If you want to catch me stream them live, head over to twitch.tv/KujoTV. On this channel, you can find the edited versions of my previous runs, and if you want the full VODs for them, head over to my Stream Archive channel. Stay tuned for some more Nuzlocke runs. We're almost on the yellow version run. See you next time.